Hello and welcome everyone to this Leadership and Influence webinar, the third webinar in the Winter 2026 IWM webinar series brought to you by Clearwater and DICA. I'm Tanveer Alvi, Training Coordinator at Clearwater. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people who are the traditional owners of the land where I am and where Clearwater operates. Clearwater pays respect to the elders past and present, and elders and people from other communities who may be present here today. A quick outline of the webinar. I will be going through the general housekeeping and a bit of overview of the Clearwater program before introducing our presenter for today. The presentation includes introduction to leadership, influence, and challenges, followed by some tools and resources for leadership. We will then have a short Q&A, and then we'll continue with some key points and reflections and more resources before the final Q&A and close of the session. As you are aware, this session is being recorded. Your microphones and cameras will be disabled, and I request you to keep them so while our presenter is talking. Chat and Q&A are available. I would ask you to use chat for comments and discussion and post your questions in the Q&A section. You can vote or like questions asked by others, keeping in mind that preference will be given to the questions with more votes or likes during the Q&A session. A quick overview of Clearwater. So it is a program hosted and funded by Melbourne Water, and we receive project funding from DICA. It started in 2002 with an aim to help the water industry develop the skills, knowledge, and connections needed to deliver IWM objectives. It's Victoria's leading IWM capacity building program, delivering trainings, tours, and various events. We also host a large online resource library featuring studies, case studies, researches, interactive tools, etc. You can visit our website to check out the resource library and other upcoming events. Future events are also listed on our Humanitics page, or you can get in touch with us to inquire about events or organization-specific tailored trainings. Coming to the most important person in this webinar today, our presenter, Dr. Andre Taylor. So Andre is a leadership development specialist who designs, delivers, and evaluates customized courses and programs for emerging leaders. His PhD research at Monash University focused on understanding how emergent leaders or champions were effective at driving positive change to advance integrated water management in Australia. He currently works as the leadership specialist and adjunct associate professor at the International WaterCentre, which is part of Griffith University. He also directs his own consulting business. So welcome, Andre, and I'll ask you to take over from here.
Thank you, Tanveer. I'm just sharing my screen.
Sorry, everyone, there might be a bit of a lag.
All right. Is that okay? That's working? Can people give me a thumbs up if they can see my cover screen? Yep. All right, we're off and running. The technology is working. Yeah. Thank you for that introduction. Thank you, Clearwater, for the invitation, and welcome, everyone. I'm really pleased to be spending a bit of time with you to share some thoughts about how to tackle this challenge. How do we influence to promote integrated water management when we don't have a lot of formal authority? We could use the word position power. So we're not a CEO, we're not a minister. We might need to influence up in our organisation or across the silos or outside the organisation. So we're talking about how to influence without much authority today. We could also label it as boundary spanning leadership. And that's the territory we're going to cover today. All right. I wanted to start with a story. I'm just, my slides are not clicking through. You might have to help me here, Tina. They're not advancing. Do I press the little... It's strange they're not advancing through here. I might need a bit of technical assistance here, Tanveer, about clicking through.
Yeah, so I think there might be a bit of a lag, but so can you see them advancing on your laptop on a separate screen, or?
No, normally they click through on the main screen, but they're not advancing here, which is a bit odd.
Yeah, maybe I can share the presentation and you can talk through it.
Yeah,
so
it might be a bit quicker. I'll just stop sharing if you wouldn't mind, and I'll just say next screen. Yeah, that's strange. It normally just clicks straight through, but it's not.
Do you want to maybe try once again while I'm trying to load it here on my laptop?
Yeah, it just won't advance screens there. So
yeah, I'm just opening the one on my laptop, and let's share it shortly.
Maybe I need to be co-host or something.
So just bear with us, everyone. A bit of a technical setback.
As Tanvir is doing that, I might share with you a personal story. It's always good to start with a personal story. And early in my career, I was working in Brisbane City Council, and it was a large organisation, 10,000 staff. So a bureaucratic organisation I was a team leader with 10 levels of management above me. And, one of my challenges in the water space was trying to influence the CEO, 3 levels above me, and then above that, civic cabinet and a Lord Mayor. And so that was the challenge that we're facing today. How do we influence up without a lot of authority? I certainly learned a lot in those years. And luckily I had a mentor, my manager, who was a great source of advice. One of the things I learned that is relevant to today's workshop is understanding the influence environment really well is important. And I learned that one of the keys to success was building a relationship with the Lord Mayor's environmental advisor, who was a trusted advisor, to use that language. His name was Doug. And if you got to know Doug and build trust in that relationship, and he thought you had credibility in terms of a water practitioner, he would influence the Lord Mayor. And once the Lord Mayor was on board, then all of the tiers of management just waved a policy initiative through the organisation. So, one of the learnings there was you have to understand your institutional environment really well. And if you do that, you can identify key targets. In this case, the key target wasn't necessarily the Lord Mayor, it was the Lord Mayor's environmental advisor. And once you had him on board, everything else was relatively easy. The story really also emphasises the importance of having forms of personal power. So I didn't have a lot of position power as a team leader, but I did have some credibility in Doug's eyes. I had a good relationship with Doug, some trust there, and I understood how the organisation worked and his role in it. So, 3 bases of personal power was needed to exert influence in that particular environment. All right, it looks like we've got our slides up. Would you mind advancing a couple of slides, Tanvir? Okay, next slide. All right, so the story I've told you really is highlighting that, leadership is really influence, and it is possible to influence without a lot of authorities. So the story I told you was a team leader in a bureaucratic organisation influencing up 3 tiers of management plus the political level above that. It is possible to do. And one of the keys is understanding that leadership is all about influence. And we do need to have power to exercise influence, but there are a lot of different power bases or forms of power that we can choose to cultivate to be influential. Next slide, thanks. All right. So what I want to do today is to share with you 7 strategies on how to influence without a lot of authority and some frameworks or tools you can use. I'm only going to cover 2 in a bit of detail. There are another 2 in the handout that you might want to have a look at. We'll explore how we can use these strategies to be more influential when you're trying to influence up, across or outside your organisation. I'll hopefully prompt some reflection on how you can be more influential in this context. To help do that, I've put together 5 reflection questions at the end of the slide deck, which is in the handout, that you can ponder perhaps after this webinar to explore some of the points that I think are worth reflecting on in a bit more depth. I also want to share with you some resources. So the handout has quite a lot of resources in it at the end, including references for the frameworks that I'll share with you along the way. So you might want to have a look at those. Next slide, thanks. We're going to have a few minutes halfway through for questions. So I'd encourage you to put them in the chat field as we go so we can get straight to them. Hopefully we can avoid that kind of awkward pause when we ask for questions if they're in the chat field already. So if you've got any questions, please put them in as we go. We'll have 5 minutes in the middle. I'll introduce the challenge in a moment. Some of the things that leaders struggle with in this context, I'll share those with you. Hopefully some will resonate. I'll then ask you to share, what's your biggest leadership challenge in this particular context. We'll work through those 7 strategies or tips that you can use to be more influential in this scenario. We'll look at some tools you can use along the way, and I'll summarise some key points at the end. We'll also have some questions, time for questions at the end if all goes well. And the handout, Tanvir, would you mind adding that to the chat field, the PDF, so people can access to it? The handout has the slides I'm using, the references that I'll point to along the way, the reflection questions that I'd invite you to have a think about after this webinar, and also my contact details are at the end if you want to get in contact with me. The time goes very quickly on these sort of webinars, so we won't have a lot of time for questions today. So if your questions don't get answered or you have some that pop up afterwards, please don't hesitate to contact me and we can have a chat. Send me an email or a message through LinkedIn. Next slide, thanks. I think I've covered this. Please use the chat field as we go. Thanks. Next slide. All right, understanding the challenge. Next slide, thanks. So the main challenge is how do we influence up in our organisations? We might be trying to influence executives or politicians if we work in government. We might be trying to influence people across the silos. Maybe we work in a policy area and we might want to get asset management and maintenance people on board with a new policy or initiative. And we might want to be influencing outside of the organisation as well. So all 3 scenarios there really is different expressions of the same challenge, and that is how do we influence when we don't have a lot of position power. Next slide, thanks. In addition to that, can we go to the next slide? Thanks. At the IWC, we work with hundreds of water leaders each year in Australia and overseas. And this is some of the things I've noticed when we're working with leaders, maybe coaching them, and they're working on this challenge. Sometimes they might not have a leader identity. They're really waiting for someone else to step up and engage in influence. So building a leader identity is really important. Sometimes they misunderstand what leadership really is and what leaders do, and they confuse having authority with leadership. So we'll be talking a bit about that today. Sometimes water leaders or practitioners lack the confidence to really start engaging in leadership, to show up, to step up, to speak up. Sometimes they don't have their power bases charged. So one of the key messages of this webinar today is that you might not have a lot of power linked to a position, but to be influential, you've still got to have other power bases charged. We call them personal power bases. And I'll share with you a kind of list of them that you can kind of gradually build and use those forms of power to be influential. They might not have a good understanding of their influence environment, which is a real problem, because to design an influence strategy, you really need to understand how the place works. They might be lacking knowledge on how to design a good influence strategy. In other words, how to apply the 7 strategies or tips that I'm going to share with you today, or they might lack the skills to execute them. For example, they might have relatively poor communication skills, which is going to be a problem. And they might fall into some classic traps along the way, such as champion-type leaders that are good at initiating change but tend to be very individualistic and don't team up. So these are some of the problems or challenges that water leaders typically face in this environment. Next slide, thanks. What about you? Here's a good coaching question. When you're seeking to influence key decision makers or stakeholders to advance integrated water management, what is the real challenge for you? So I'd love you to type something in the chat field. What's your biggest challenge here? Don't think about it too much. Just type in what comes to mind. It might be a self-leadership challenge, maybe that you're lacking the confidence to kind of step up and engage in leadership, influence. It might be a knowledge challenge, not understanding, who to target or how to do it. Or it could be an execution challenge, not having some of the skills needed, such as, networking, communication. Thank you, Rebecca, for getting us going. Knowing who I need approval for which elements. Yeah, so your influence target. We'll talk more about that. Sometimes the influence target isn't the person you initially think it is. So the story I told you at the start about working with the Lord Mayor's environmental advisor is a good example. When I first started working at that organisation, I didn't even know he existed, but discovering that he was a key player, building relationship with him was a key to really opening up, understanding how that organisation operates and making it much easier to influence through the levels of management. All right, we've got a few challenges coming through. Celine, good to see you, Celine. Building trusting relationships can be a challenge in a fast-paced environment where people have too little time. Yeah, good challenge. Nathan, challenge to get approvals from counsellors, lack of understanding the process and time. Is that timelines there? And Lewis, getting integrated water management as a priority, conversations usually lead to costs. Yeah, so some good challenges there. Thank you for sharing. Next slide, thanks. All right, so let's get stuck into talking about these strategies that we can apply. Next slide, thanks. So I'm going to go through 7. We'll pause halfway and have a few questions. The first strategy is to develop a leader identity. This is really important. This is making the transition from just being a water professional to someone who's a water leader, who's comfortable stepping up, showing up and speaking up. And it's really the first step in growing as a leader, someone who's influential. And to do it, we really need to understand what leadership is and what it isn't, and understand what leaders do. So we get comfortable with the concept of, yes, I'm engaging in leadership and it's something that I can do. In leadership development, it's the first base. We can't really grow as a leader until we've developed this first identity. And once we do, it can really set off a kind of virtuous cycle of growth. We might get a mentor, a coach, join a leadership program, turn up to a webinar like this, act in a more senior role, get some feedback, and all of a sudden our performance as a leader, someone who influences, really takes off. So this is the first step. Next slide, thanks, Tanvir. How do we do that? How do we build a leader identity? One way is to understand what leadership is, and there's often a lot of confusion around leadership. Sometimes it's confused with authority. So here's a definition. It's a social process of influence that delivers 3 outcomes: a shared vision for where we're going. It might be a shared vision for our organisation's adoption of integrated water management. What does that look like? Aligning all of our activities. It might be aligning, policy, planning, development, assessment, construction, maintenance, design, asset management. So it's all aligned with our policy for integrated water management. And commitment. In other words, people are engaged with this journey. So people are personally committed to work together to deliver this shared vision. So if we're engaging in leadership, we're engaged in a social, interacting with people through communication and relationships, a social process of influence to deliver the DAC outcomes of leadership. Note that it doesn't link leadership to a position. So anyone can potentially engage in leadership. You still have to have some form of power, which is simply defined as the potential for influence. So today, for example, hopefully I can influence you or persuade you a little bit to pick up some of these strategies and apply them. And I don't have any position power here at all. You're purely here voluntarily, but hopefully I've got a bit of personal power, hopefully a bit of credibility and expertise that adds some weight to my recommendations. So you don't need to have a position that has a lot of power in it to engage in leadership as defined here. And understanding that this is leadership can be a real breakthrough for people, and it can help to build a leader identity. Next slide, thanks. Another way we can build a leader identity is to get acting like a leader. One of my favourite authors and researchers is a lady called Herminia Ibarra, who's Professor of Organisational Leadership at the London Business School. And one of her most popular books is called Act Like a Leader, Think Like a Leader, Herminia Ibarra. And she argues that to build a leader identity, we've got to act first. We can't just dream our way into it. We've got to understand what leadership is. We've got to have a go at it. And through our practice, we build a leader identity. So what do leaders do? They do this. This is Rosabeth Moss-Kanter's 6 Keys to Leading Positive Change, a fantastic framework. And it's a TED Talk if you want to know more. Have a look at in the handout, the references will give you the link to the video. But leaders show up, they choose to engage in leadership or influence. They don't wait for others to do it. They speak up, they find their voice in different ways. They look up, their activities are guided by purpose, vision, and values. They team up. You'll notice that's a theme of today's webinar, the importance of teaming up, not being a solo act. They never give up. They're persistent, adaptive, agile. They learn quickly. They're reflective. And they lift others up along the way. They acknowledge other people. They celebrate progress. They celebrate the small wins along the way. So when we're engaging in influence and leadership, we should be doing all of these 6 things. And through our practice, that should help to build a leader identity. So here's my first question to you on this framework. Are you doing all these 6 things when you're engaging in leadership, or are you forgetting some of them, like not teaming up, for example, being too solo? Next slide, thanks. The second strategy is to recognise that you can't engage in leadership, you can't be influential if you don't have some forms of power to draw on. It's a bit like using your phone if the battery is dead. It just doesn't work. And I think this is probably the biggest mistake I see younger leaders make in the first maybe 5 to 10 years of their careers, seeking to be influential without doing the work to charge their power bases. Now, there are different forms of power bases. I don't know if you can see my pointer on the screen. Give me a thumbs up if you can. I'm just pointing to the diagram here. Okay, it doesn't look like you can. On the left-hand side of this diagram, we've got forms of position power, which is linked to your organisation, such as the power to hire and fire people. And then we've got other forms of power, which is personal power that we can choose to build that are separate from our position in our organisation. And that's what I want to focus on for a few minutes. Next slide, please. Some research by the Centre for Creative Leadership that found that leaders tend to use power bases linked to their relationships, their networks, access to information, and the power of expertise the most. And you'll notice that those 3 bases of power are personal power, not position power. So once again, we find that, the most effective leaders don't rely on their position power to drive change. They use personal power. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a non-exhaustive list of those personal power bases that you might have charged. When I think of some of the people I know in the Australian water sector who are very influential but don't have a lot of position power, people like Brad Dalrymple at Ocean Protect, you might know him, a fellow of the IWC Water Leadership Program. When I look at those leaders, I see them as having pretty much all of these bases charged, or at least 80% plus. So they've got credibility, they've got expertise that they can draw on, broad and deep. They've got great relationships that are characterised by trust. They've got access to information, new innovations. They've got good linkages with researchers, for example. They've got access to resources. They understand their influence environment very well. They've got particular skills they need to be influential, like using Teams to deliver a slide deck. Communication skills is an obvious one. They're seen as authentic leaders, which is a form of power because people trust them. And in some cases, they have quite a bit of charisma as well. So here's another question for you. If you did an audit against all of these sources of personal power, which ones are strong? Which ones are fully charged? Is it just 1 or 2? If you want to be a highly effective leader, you would want to aim at building as many of these as possible. And it does take time. We'd probably need another workshop to explore how to charge each one, because there's different strategies for each of these. But my suggestion would be to work with a mentor, a more experienced leader, to have a discussion about how you can build power on any of these areas. The key point is you've got to have at least one power base highly charged, and most effective leaders have most of them, if not all of them, fully charged. Next slide, thanks. There's a saying, dig your well before you're thirsty. Charge your power bases before you want to be influential. It takes time, building institutional knowledge, for example, building relationships, building credibility as a water practitioner. All of these things can't be done overnight. It takes time. So you've got to be patient. It can be accelerated by working with, say, a mentor who knows your organisation well. The story I shared with you at the start, my manager was acting like a mentor. He'd been in the organisation many years and could explain to me how the place operated. So his advice was invaluable. Be patient. It can take some time to build. Here's another question for you. Do you have a mentor right now that can help you be more influential in your organisation or broader institution? Good mentors are really valuable. People like Cheryl Battergold, former chair of the board of the CRC for Water Sensitive Cities, who mentors a lot of people. They're incredibly valuable and can accelerate your growth as a leader and accelerate your ability to influence. So a mentor who understands your context that you want to be influential within is extremely valuable. It's high impact, low cost. So if you don't have one, I'd make that a high priority. Next slide, thanks. I think it's time for a few questions. I haven't been monitoring the chat field. I'm not sure if there's any questions in there. Were there any come up so far, Tanvir? If not, now's the time. We've got a chance for a few questions.
Yes, so there are a few questions, and one that I think is particularly interesting is from Anup Faiju. He's asking how to convert your priorities to approval or approving authorities' priorities.
Yeah, how do you align your priorities with their priorities? One of the tips of the frameworks that we're going to be exploring in a few minutes is to strategically frame your influence attempt in ways that resonate with the decision makers' priorities. So for example, in the water sector, we go through phases where the focus shifts from, flooding, water conservation, water recycling, managing the heat island effect, and there's phases that we go through where the strategic priorities of an organisation change. Savvy leaders recognise that they need to shift the strategic frame of their influence attempts. So integrated water management, as I'm sure everyone knows, has multiple benefits. Yeah. So right now in my organisation, I might be promoting the water conservation benefits of IWM and putting the strategic frame around that because I know that is going to get traction at executive levels and political levels. So maybe in 5 years' time, it'll be a different focus around greening the city and cooling the city. That'll be a focus. So trying to put a strategic frame around what you want to promote so that it resonates and connect with the priorities of the target audience or influence target is a key. Have we got any more questions?
Yeah, this one from Natasha and Belinda is also interested in this. And they're asking, how do you build charisma?
Yeah, well, charisma is in the eye of the beholder. It's somewhat intangible. I think it's defined as divine gift. But for me, I look at the concept of charisma very broadly. I don't think of it just as your Hollywood movie stars. I think of charisma as someone who I want to listen to, is interesting, got some interesting ideas, is enthusiastic, positive. I feel good speaking to them or listening to them, and someone who carefully takes their communication very seriously. So they've got interesting stories to tell. They're prepared at various communication events. So for me, that's how I define charisma. And if you define it broadly like that, that's something we can do. We can polish our communication skills. We can have interesting stories to tell. We can bring energy and enthusiasm to events. Yeah. So we don't have to transform into, a movie star.
I guess we can maybe we can take one more from, this one's from Nathan, asking can anyone other than a leader be an influencer? And he's also asking that, not all organizations have mentors. What do you do in that case?
Yeah, okay, so let's tackle the mentoring one first. I think the most powerful form of mentoring is initiated by the mentee. So, if I was starting my career again, I would do a lot more mentoring. I would approach people had more experience than me that I was impressed by, and I'd say, hey, can I have a coffee chat? I really want to talk to you about how you chair a meeting or tell stories at public events, because that's a skill I want to develop, and I'd really be keen to learn from your experience. So I'd take an informal approach. I would make it very easy for them to say yes. I'd use a little bit of ingratiation, flattery. I'd buy them coffee, and I wouldn't ask them to commit beyond just a once-off conversation. And if the conversation goes really well, it might evolve into an ongoing mentoring relationship. And I'd talk to different people for different topics. So we'd call that informal mentoring that's initiated by the mentee. And I think once you've done that once or twice, it's incredibly easy, and it's rare for a good mentor to say no. Yeah, very rare. If they say no, they probably wouldn't be a good mentor. That's the first point. There was a double-barreled question there. Just, I would say, don't confuse being influential and a leader and being a influencer. These are kind of three different terms. To be a leader, you've got to engage in influence, as we've defined. So a social process of influence to deliver direction, alignment, commitment. So leadership is all about influence. Okay. The term influencer, has that connotation of, influencing through social media. It's a form of leadership, absolutely. But recognise that if you're engaging in influence to deliver direction, alignment of activities, and getting people to buy in, personal commitment to go on that journey, you are engaging in leadership. You are a leader by definition, irrespective of what role you hold in the organisation. And understanding that is a big mindset shift for a lot of leaders. And it's very empowering, because it means that, everyone online today can engage in influence and leadership if they want to. They don't have to wait. All right, let's keep moving, and we'll come back to some questions at the end. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we've looked at building a leader identity as a strategy, and building your power base is absolutely essential. Next one is understanding your leadership environment or context. So who are the real decision makers that I need to influence? It may not be the people that you think. I remember hearing a presentation by the WWF, Worldwide Fund for Nature, talking about influencing national policy, like protecting the reef, for example. And I remember hearing the CEOs of that organisation speak, and he made the point that they spend a lot of time targeting politicians or members of political parties that you don't see on the news every night. They're the president of the Labor Party, for example, the Prime Minister, who's working behind the scenes on policy. So be open to the fact that the real decision maker might not be the one you think it is initially. The story I shared with you at the start is a good example of that. Be aware of the timing. When are the windows of opportunity or the crises that might occur? In the water sector, a lot of them are reasonably foreseeable, droughts, floods, etc., changes of government. These represent windows of opportunity that you want to be prepared for. Know your potential allies and adversaries, people that might block initiatives. Need to know who they are. Think about the venues you might have to create influence. For example, your organisation might be a bit of a desert for good ideas relating to IWM at the moment. Maybe it's better to work outside the organisation with stakeholder groups to influence the organisation at a political level. So some champions for integrated water management do that. They've kind of given up on working within their organisation at the moment, given the culture and the management environment, and they're spending most of their efforts working outside of the organisation to put pressure on the political element of their organisation. So, it's called venue shopping. Shop around for the venue where you're going to get the most traction, or create a venue. That's called venue creation as well, like a new group, an advocacy coalition, something like the Wentworth Group of Concerned Scientists would be an example of that, where groups of people get together to form a new environment where they can influence stakeholders through that coalition. Think about your best choice of influence tactics. We're going to talk about that more in a moment. All right, so you need to understand your context. That's essential. Next slide, thanks. The fourth strategy is team up, and this is particularly relevant to champion-type leaders. By that, I mean people that have a natural tendency to initiate change. Like we could call them entrepreneurial, key change agents. They're good at starting initiatives for integrated water management. But some of the downsides of the champion role is they tend to be a little bit too individualistic. They don't team up enough. They also go a bit too fast for many people, and they leave initiatives too early. So there's some classic traps. Teaming up is one of them. You might remember this was one of Moss Cantor's 6 keys to leading positive change. Team up. So get together with people and influence, form an advocacy coalition. For example, if you're trying to influence up in the organisation and you're trying to put up a new policy, rather than just your team influencing up, why not get together with people across your management silos who think the policy is a good idea and put it up as a joint initiative? The tandem model of championship is relevant here. So it's a very specific form of teaming up. So the tandem model of championship's been known about since the 1970s. What happens there is at the project level, it might be a fairly junior level, a water leader might have a great idea and they want to influence up in their organisation. We call that a project champion. And they build a very strong relationship with a more senior leader. We might be at the executive level, we'd call that an executive champion or a political champion. And the nature of that relationship helps the project champion to influence up. So highly effective project level champions usually have great relationships with one or more leaders that are supportive of their ideas at the executive level and or political level. So building that relationship is often a key to success here. And, you know, the very best IWM champions that I know of that work in bureaucratic organisations that have to influence up are extremely good at this particular aspect of leadership. The Wentworth group of concerned scientists, the graphic on this slide highlights their webpage. A classic example of a group of concerned water scientists that have teamed up, initially led by Peter Cullen, to lobby the government about positive reforms to the water sector. So what's the equivalent of the Wentworth group in Victoria for integrated water management? Does it exist? Is there a lobbying group? I don't know the answer to that question. And if it doesn't exist, should it? Next slide, thanks. Take time to carefully plan your influence attempts. If you've got a really significant influence challenge, like getting your organisation to adopt a new policy or significant new funding initiative, and it's not going to be easy, it pays to sit down maybe with a mentor or a group of peers, your coalition, your advocacy coalition, and do it together. Think about the application of these 7 strategies that I'm sharing with you. If you spend a bit of time thinking through things like who are our influence targets, when's the best time to launch this initiative, what influence tactics are we going to use, in other words, applying the 7 strategies I'm walking through today, you're going to have a better chance of success. So, every battle is won or lost before it is ever fought is a quote from Sun Tzu, a Chinese philosopher and military general, making the point that good planning is essential. Next slide, thanks. Fortunately, there's some tools we can use, and I'm going to share with you 2. I won't go through all 4. The handout has 4 covered. I don't think we'll have enough time, but there's some frameworks we can use to help us choose a set of influence tactics when we're designing our influence strategy. So let me go through 2 in a bit of depth, and then I'll just briefly mention the other 2. Next slide, thanks. One framework or tool we can use is the head, heart, hand model of influence. So I would always have this on the top of my list. And what it says is there's broadly 3 groups of influence strategies we could choose to use. There's one which is the head, logical appeal. So there's the example would be a business case, cost-benefit analysis, a set of research findings. A lot of leaders I work with come from a scientific or engineering background, so they go to that immediately, perhaps neglecting the other 2 elements. The second element or set of influence tactics are emotional appeals, and that might be indicating how the initiative aligns with the corporate purpose, vision, values, for example. And the third set of influence tactics are a little bit more mysterious, a little bit harder to comprehend, and they're cooperative appeals. So head, heart, hand. An example of that is to use a pilot project, for example, to engage stakeholders that might be a little bit sceptical. Let's say you're trying to promote a particular form of integrated water management and you've got sceptical stakeholders, maybe sceptical asset managers. So you do a pilot program and you aim to use that pilot program as a way of influencing, engaging those stakeholders to come on board with your broader initiatives. So a pilot program is just one example. It might be consultation, it might be partnering with them. Now, the proponents of this framework suggest that if you're 100% sure that one of these tactics will work for a particular influence target, then great, use that. But more commonly, you're not sure which of these three strategies are going to work. And more commonly, you're trying to influence a group of people, not just one person. And that group of people is fairly diverse. So most of the time, you'd have to end up with a combination of all three. So your pitch or your proposal, your manifesto would include logical appeals, the head, emotional appeals, the heart, and the cooperative or collaborative appeals, the hand elements. Do all three. And if you're not sure, do all three. If you want to know more, have a look at the slide deck, the handout, and have a look at that paper for a little more fuller explanation. Next slide, thanks. The second framework I wanted to share with you comes from a case study from the company IWM, where a group of middle managers managed to influence up and save the organisation from a very large mistake. And it talks about 7 strategies that these leaders use to influence up in their organisation. So very much relevant to our topic today. How do you influence without much authority? And I did my PhD research on champion leaders in the water sector that were very much focused on influencing across the silos, outside the organisation, and influencing up. And the most effective ones that I studied in my 6 case studies used these steps. You could see them being done all the time. So they were very good at using these steps. That's one of the reasons I like this framework. There's a 1-page summary of this paper in your handout. It's the full paper's behind a paywall at the moment, so I put together a 1-page summary. Let me just walk you through it. So the first step is just be crystal clear about what you want to achieve. That sounds obvious, but a lot of leaders I know have trouble articulating it very succinctly. So be crystal clear about what you want to achieve and how that links to the organisation's purpose, vision, and values. Next step is have some sort of manifesto. That's your pitch. It might be a written document, a video, a presentation, but this is where you might integrate your head, heart, and influence tactics. The third step is team up, have a coalition, an advocacy coalition, across the organisation. So it's not just you. And that might mean engaging your allies as well across the organisation, knowing who they are. Tip number 4 is pick your targets. Be super clear on who your influence targets are. We've talked about that already. And just be wary of the fact the real decision maker might not be immediately obvious to you. Co-opt and neutralise talks about being aware of your allies and your potential adversaries. These are people that could attack your ideas. So recognise them early, speak to them early, try to get them to at least a neutral state where they might not love your ideas, but at least they're not going to attack it. In some cases, I've seen examples of leaders that have swung blockers, adversaries around to become allies over time, largely through pilot programs, and they can be really powerful members of that advocacy coalition. Tip number 6 is find a translator at senior levels. So someone in the executive management team or on civic cabinet, for example, if you're in government, local government, who can translate your technical language into management speak or political speak. The story I shared with you at the start was a full-time political advisor who was able to turn, what my language into language that resonated with the Lord Mayor. So who is your translator? And the last one is win small, win early, win often. They emphasize the importance of doing pilots, doing trials to gather information to strengthen your business case or your manifesto. And the most effective leaders I know squeeze enormous value out of those pilots and trials. So that's a useful framework to use when you're trying to influence up without much authority, and it combines quite a few of the tips that we're covering today, like the importance of teaming up. All right, next slide. I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but there's a one-pager in the handout that shares with you some research findings that Ashford and Dietert did on people that are team leaders in bureaucratic organisations, what they frequently do to influence up, and there's some overlap with the frameworks I've shared with you so far, but there's some new things in there. For example, tip number 3 there is that they usually have high levels of emotional intelligence and are able and focus on emphasising the positives rather than the negatives. So encouraging, reasons why we should do an initiative, the positives, the benefits, rather than dwelling on the negatives and avoiding negative emotions when pitching their ideas. So there's some interesting additional elements that these researchers have found. Some are quite important, I think. Like tip number 6 is about using informal mechanisms to test your ideas through the organisation. Talking to people across the organisation, pitching the idea, getting some informal feedback, and then when you feel that you've got an idea that's going to have some traction and maybe you've persuaded the key people already, then use the formal elements in your organisation to formally pitch the idea as well. Don't neglect those formal processes. Use them kind of as a secondary step. So informal first, test the idea, persuade. That's where the heavy lifting's done, and then follow it up with the formal pitch, policy initiatives, whatever you need to do to get something officially adopted. Next slide, thanks. The other framework I want to share with you comes from a video that you can watch. So if you look at the handout, have a look at the video link. It's a half-an-hour video from John Thwaites, former Deputy Premier of Victoria, who works at Monash University these days. And he goes through 10 steps to influence politicians. And again, some of them we've seen before, like step 6 there about, come as a team up, get your advocacy coalition together. But there's, again, some elements that are a little unusual in this framework, like step number 4 there, understand where the target politician is in their political lifestyle. So John makes the point that you're much better off trying to engage politicians when they're in opposition and developing their policies to take to the next election. Once they're elected and in government, they're incredibly time poor and it's very hard to see them. So some really practical advice there about how you might influence politicians as a water practitioner. All right, next slide, thanks. Strategy number 6, we're almost done, so we're only going to do 7 today. Strategy number 6 is use situational leadership. So what that means is using different leadership styles at different times. Daniel Goldman, who's written a lot about this topic, uses a golfing analogy. So imagine playing golf where you're working your way around a golf course. As your context is changing, you're using different clubs in your bag. So highly effective leaders use different clubs, leadership styles at different times. They don't just use one. This is a very common misunderstanding with people that are just starting their leadership development journey. They think they have to discover, one style and just use that. You wouldn't be a great golfer if you could only ever use one club. So there are different frameworks for learning how to use different leadership styles at different times. Emotional intelligence is needed to know when to switch and to be able to use those different styles. One style that's particularly relevant to this context, influencing without much authority, is the transformational leadership style. You've probably heard of it. It's very, very popular. So learning to be a strong transformational leader, someone who can use this style, is definitely a key to success. Ways you can do that is, reading a book like the one shown on the slide here, which will take you through it, doing a leadership program that gives you 360-degree feedback on this style. And if you want to know the behaviours associated with this framework, the 5 practices of exemplary leadership framework, just ask AI to give you a quick summary of the behaviours that leaders frequently use when they're using this particular framework, which describes transformational leadership. And then ask yourself, do I frequently use those behaviours? Strong transformational leaders do. The outcome of using that style is the people that are being influenced are generally much more motivated, and there's a much greater level of engagement and buy-in. So a really handy style to use in this context. Definitely want to have that as part of your leadership toolkit. Next slide, thanks. As part of situational leadership, we also want to be an authentic leader. So if you think about some leaders nationally that are really highly effective, they're often authentic leaders. The former CEO of IWC, Mark Pascoe, highly authentic leader. I mentioned Cheryl Battergold before, highly authentic leader. Rob Skinner, former MD of Melbourne Water, highly authentic leader. So they're very self-aware. They know their true north, purpose and values. They act in accordance with those values at all times. They value honesty. They're servant leaders. They look to serve others, and they are transparent in their relationships. So you really get to know the real person. So being an authentic leader enables trust, and then trust is a form and enables you to be more influential. If someone trusts you because you're a great authentic leader, then you're more able to influence them through personal power. Next slide, thanks. So you want to be an authentic leader?
Sorry, I was just pointing out that it's 1:22, so we are like 8 to 9 minutes remaining in the webinar.
Okay, thanks for that. So we want to be an authentic leader to build trust, and we also want to be a situational leadership using different styles at different times, particularly the transformational leadership style. Here's a quote from Bill George, a thought leader on authentic leadership, just making the point that if we're an authentic leader, we can build trust, and through trust, we can influence. Next slide, thanks. The last strategy I wanted to share with you before we open up to questions is to be agile, opportunistic, and a quick learner. So when we're designing an influence strategy and executing it and trying to influence, we're in a complex space, right? Because people are complex. So we can't predict exactly what's going to happen. So we need to get feedback. We need to monitor what's going on. We need to pivot to a new strategy. We want to be reflective. And this is also consistent with the concept of what we might call adaptive leadership. So, experiment with different influence tactics, monitor what's happening, quickly adapt, reflect so that you're learning, don't ruminate, reflect positively, turn it into action, celebrate the small wins, and be persistent, play a long game. Really important when executing an influence strategy. Next slide, thanks. All right, we might skip that one. And let's, I think we've got a bit of time for key points, and then we'll go for questions. So the next slide, thanks. My key points are leading without authority is not easy, but possible to do. It does require having a leader identity. That's the first step. Seeing leadership as just a social process of influence that delivers direction, alignment, commitment. It does require a broad range of abilities over time, like authentic leadership, transformational leadership, communication skills. So it does take time. Emerging leaders need to be patient. You can't just instantly charge your power bases and instantly develop all these skills. So it does take time. So you need to be patient, proactive, strategic in our planning of influence attempts, opportunistic, using windows of opportunity, agile, adaptive, and very fast learners, which means, being a good reflective leader. I think if you apply the 7 strategies that I've covered briefly today, they're really going to enhance your probability of success, aided by some of those influence frameworks, particularly the head, heart, hand frameworks, which can help you to choose a set of influence tactics as part of a broader influence strategy. What's the next step? I would suggest working with someone, maybe a peer as part of an advocacy coalition or a mentor in your organisation, someone who knows your influence environment very well, to sit down with them and work through these 7 strategies and build an influence plan to achieve your influence objectives. I think spending a bit of time on that, maybe an hour's discussion to do that, is really going to enhance your probability of success. All right, next slide, thanks. We might just, if later in your career you want to do a deep dive into your leadership development, have a look at the products and services that the IWC does, and or speak to me and have a chat about the various options. Next slide, thanks. We've just skipped through these slides. There's a bunch of resources at the end of the handout that you can learn more about all the things I've touched on, and my contact details are at the end of the slide deck as well, so feel free to send me a message. Next slide is my contact details. That's there as well. All right, have we got time for some questions?
Yep, I guess we can take a few. So here's one from Darren. He's saying that integrated water management is very engineering speak, which most people's eyes glaze over the term. So what is your way of explaining to general audience who need to come on a board?
Can you repeat the question? I didn't catch the word. IWM is very...
So it's like very, engineering terminology. So what is your way of explaining to general audience who need to come on board?
Yeah. So yeah, engineering terminology jargon. Yeah. I think one of the tips I touched on, find a translator, you know, in that Hamill's 7-step framework, one of them was find your translator. So if you're trying to pitch an initiative to an executive audience, for example, who is your translator? Who's in that environment that can work with you to turn your language into something that's going to resonate in that audience, or even co-present with you, you know? So turn engineering jargon into management speak or political speak. I think another key is to use other ways to communicate as well, like put people in a bus and go on a tour to visit a whole bunch of pilot projects, or tell stories, you know, to illustrate the point that you're trying to make. So there's some suggestions, but find a translator would be my main one.
And I guess you can take one more from Micah. He's asking if you have examples of how early, small, quick wins build credibility and trust, as well as how to find the people with the technical ability and openness to implement innovative projects.
Yeah, so using pilot programs. So some of the leaders that I've studied and worked with, have worked with as part of coaching, consciously use pilot programs to do a lot of things. You know, they might build a I don't know, a street tree bioretention system, for example, and they use that not only to demonstrate the technical feasibility of what they're trying to do, but they use it to gather information on, you know, costs. They use it as an opportunity to bring people along to go and visit it, and then they've got a captive audience for an hour or something to, you know, sell the whole IWM or water sensitive cities agenda. They might do social media on it. You know, they might work with a researcher to publish papers on it. So the bottom line is that they've thought very carefully about how to use a fairly modest little pilot project to generate lots of benefits and influence, and capture the attention of people that otherwise might not be interested. You know, so things like politicians or developers that are sometimes hard to engage. But if you know, having a barbecue out on site and, you know, at a pilot program where there's a bunch of speakers, you might get, you know, politicians or executives showing up to an event like that. So they're very ingenious and in the way that they use pilot programs to maximize their benefit for influence, and also build their credibility as an emerging water leader. Yeah. They don't stumble into it. Yeah. There was another question that I might not have addressed in there. I think it's a double-barreled question.
Yep. So there are a few. I guess we had time for just one. So sorry, I'll just quickly go through. Yes, this one is from Louis. As financial pressures continue to grow, how can we refocus on the fundamental value and purpose that sustainability is meant to serve?
Yeah. So I think that question talks about what kind of strategic frame you can use to promote an initiative. You know, so if an organisation is really tight financially, you might have to look at aspects of integrated water management that are more aligned with the organisation's strategic priorities elsewhere. You know, so I would ask the question, in my influence environment, what are the decision makers' strategic priorities at the moment, and what are they going to be for the next, say, year? And out of all the things I want to promote, you know, what can I put up that's, one, aligned with their strategic priorities, and two, you know, doesn't cost the earth given the context around, limited financial resources. And I'd be prepared to compromise, you know. So what can I get going to build some momentum? And then if I can get a few things up and running, how can I build it from there? You know, so there's some thoughts.
Great. Thanks so much, Andre. And I guess, yes, it's 1:31. So will be closing the webinar now, but I just want to thank you for all this really wonderful, insightful, and very informative webinar today, and for sharing your experiences and your stories. And a very big thank you to everyone for joining us today here in this webinar. As you already have Andre's contact details, I guess he'll be very happy to answer your questions. So please do get in touch with him. And yes, you have Clearwater contact details as well. So feel free to get in touch with us as well. Once again, thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a wonderful day.